Hi, welcome back to the channel. We are still discussing this book, The Ego Tunnel by Thomas Metzingers. Today we're going to look at chapter 1. If you haven't seen the video on the introduction, I would advise you to do so because it's going to be hard for you to follow if you haven't seen, the introduction. It's going to be a bit of a ride today, so brace yourselves. There's a lot of stuff in the first chapter. I'm going to proceed the way I have in the introduction, so I'm going to always present you with some hypotheses that I was able to extract from the text. I'm going to number those consecutively so that if by any chance you read the book yourself, you will be able to identify the hypotheses because they're direct quotes from the text. So you'll be able to follow, my way of thinking. And as I did last time, am going to cluster the hypotheses in a couple of themes so that it's going to be easier to discuss them. Also, I meant to excuse myself for looking down so much. It's because I'm actually working with notes. There's no way I can, remember all of those details by heart. So I'm going to have to look at my own notes quite a lot. I would like to start with these three hypotheses. Consciousness is the appearance of a world. Consciousness is part of the world and contains it at the same time. By now, you realize why I will separate one sentence into two hypotheses because they are separable, and we should treat each statement that we can extract as its own hypothesis. So, in my opinion, Metzingers should be a bit more specific here about what he means by the term world. If by the world he means a subjective world, as in a representation in your mind or brain, the statement 34 would inadvertently be an idealist and not a materialist argument. So let's try this. Let's try to specify for him the term world and let's replace it by the term subjective world, and let's just try those three hypotheses by doing so. So they would then read: consciousness is the appearance of a subjective world. Consciousness is part of the subjective world and contains it at the same time. It should become apparent to you how that would be more of an idealist than a materialist argument, if you thought of the world as being a subjective world. So, and if in turn by the world he means an objective external world, hypothesis 35, which reads consciousness is part of the world, and we would then say consciousness is part of the external world, and that would run counter to his claim that he made in the introduction that consciousness is solely subjective. So at best, I have to put the caveat here that there's a strong possibility that I understand something wrong because I'm just a human being, regular human being, trying to wrap my head around this text. So, but I think at best we could say that in these first three hypotheses, Metzingers should be a little bit more precise about what he means by the term world. Next, we have two statements. Consciousness is part of the physical universe and it is an evolving biological phenomenon. With statement 38, Metzinger makes a strong case for strong materialism, by saying that consciousness is a biological phenomenon. And I would like to make clear for those of you that don't have a philosophical background what we mean by strong materialism. So in consciousness studies, strong materialism suggests that consciousness can ultimately be explained by physical processes in the brain, which, to my understanding so far, is what Metzinger claims in this book. So I would call him a materialist. Proponents of materialism argue that phenomena including thoughts, emotions, and perceptions can be reduced to and understood in terms of just neural activity and physical matter. So this perspective usually rejects any notion of dualism or non-physical properties that could influence, consciousness. I just wanted to make that point, that he, in these two statements, makes, claims or has a stance of strong materialism. What sets human consciousness apart from other biologically evolved phenomena is that it makes reality appear within itself. It creates inwardness. The life process has become aware of itself, i.e. is self-conscious. Here, Metzinger seems to be making the claim or the case that self-consciousness is uniquely accessible to humans, as opposed to animals or other biological organisms. And he does so by claiming that only humans have a sense of inwardness or self-awareness. That at least seems to be the claim. But his supposed main proof point, namely statement 40, is, in my opinion, a moot point, because it only is an argument for naive realism, which we will get to a little bit later in this chapter. And he will later claim in this chapter that naive realism is the case both for humans and animals. So he sort of contradicts himself here with statement 40, or actually 39 and 40 combined. In order to claim a type of consciousness only for humans, what, in my opinion, he would have to claim is that what's unique to humans is that they can actually overcome this aspect of transparency. Remember that transparency refers to the idea that we are usually not aware of our own cognitive processes or the mechanisms behind our having experiences, which I think you could say is true for most people, actually. I mean, I don't think that there's a lot of people who spend any time thinking about, how they cognize and how experience comes about and whether or not their ego is just a construct. I mean, I think there's just a very few people in this world who actually think about these things. So basically, even though humans technically have the capability to become aware of transparency, of their own ignorance, so to speak, not a lot of people choose to. But let's just say, since human beings have potentially the, ability to become aware of their ignorance, that is what Metzinger claims to be sort of like the distinguishing factor between us humans and other biological evolved phenomena. And I would contend that. our capability to overcome transparency itself would be the sort of distinguishing factor between humans and animals. What he should claim, in my opinion, is that humans, and only humans, have the capacity to become aware that their perception of self is an illusion. I think that's sort of like the deciding factor. That's something, in my opinion, that we could claim. We can't prove it, obviously, but we could claim that that is something that sets human beings apart from animals, for instance, is that we have the capacity to pretty much become enlightened, really, because enlightenment to me is in large parts to become aware of the ego or your point of view just being a construct, and nothing real, so to speak, in terms of it's not a thing, it's not an entity, it's not a real entity, it's just a construct. And I think that encapsulates, to me, in my mind, a lot what enlightenment is about. So in essence, you could say human beings have the capacity to be enlightened by virtue of becoming aware that their ego only is a construct, whereas animals probably don't have that capacity. And that's a difficult position to have still, in my opinion. But anyway, I think that's what he should be saying. So, in order to thus make the point that he's trying to make, I would attempt to reformulate it, and I would probably put something like, what sets human consciousness apart from other biologically evolved phenomena is that only in humans the life process can become aware of itself, including the insight that the point of view or ego is but a part of this very process and not a real thing. I think if he had put it this way, and if that's indeed what he's trying to say, then that's probably how he should have put it, at least for me to understand him correctly. The confusion, or the apparent confusion in Metzinger's line of argument, becomes a little more pronounced as we read on. He says, an animal that cannot reason or speak a language can certainly have transparent phenomenal states, and that is all it takes to make a world appear in consciousness. So he basically contradicts himself here, I think, again, a little bit, because here he says that both animals can have transparent phenomenal states. So, meaning in a transparent phenomenal state, a world appears to you. That's what a transparent phenomenal state is about. A world appears to you, period. And if you go back to statement 39 and 40, he claimed that, or at least he seems to claim that is what sets us apart from other biologically evolved phenomena, which can't be what he wants to say, really. So, but anyway, just to show you that I think he should be a bit more precise in his language. I must say I haven't read the German version, which is the original version, so maybe he's more precise in German than the English translation is. That's entirely possible. Metzinger continues to talk about the difference between humans and animals, and I feel that his self-contradiction becomes a little bit more pronounced as we read on. Let's look at the next four statements. he says there are 17 criteria for brain structures subserving consciousness. There is evidence for the existence of such structures not only in mammals but also in birds and potentially in octopi. The empirical evidence for animal consciousness is now far beyond any reasonable doubt. Like us, animals are naive realists. So, here he basically confirms what I said in the chapter of this video before, is that he basically puts us at par with animals in that we all are capable of having some sort of phenomenal world appear to us. So let's maybe clarify what naive realism means. I just want to make sure that we all are on the same page. So the statements like us animals are naive realists means that animals, similar to humans, have the capacity to perceive a world. Naive realism suggests that individuals believe their senses provide them with access to reality rather than filtered or constructed representations. So a naive realist, if I understand it correctly, is an organism to whom or to which some world appears by virtue of them having sensory organs and some type of nervous system or brain, but they are in a state of but that's still is transparent to them, and the choice of words is a bit unfortunate because transparency doesn't really convey what he's trying to say easily, so we always have to go back and explain what he means by transparency. But basically what he says is that both animals and humans have the capacity to have a world appear to them by virtue of them having sensory organs and brains and nervous systems, but that in both humans and animals at this stage of development, naive realism means that you're having that reality appear to you, you're not conscious of it, it's just happening, so it's happening, but you're not like metacognizing, the fact that it's happening. Let's look at 3 more statements. The truly remarkable fact is that we, meaning humans, can also attend to the content of our PSM and form concepts about it. We can communicate about it with one another, and we can experience this as our own activity. Okay. If you are aware of the content of your PSM, you could, in my opinion, technically still be just a naive realist. So what do I mean by that? Is that a world appears to you and you take this appearance seriously, so to speak, So that in itself doesn't say anything about your being conscious of this being a construct, So you can conceive and talk about your thoughts and feelings all you want, and create all kinds of theories about your thoughts and your feelings, but I think that does not mean that you are aware of it all being a construct. Most people, as we said before, or as I said claimed before, are probably in that sort of state, is that yes, the world does appear to them, they take their thoughts, feelings and whatever seriously, they think it's real, that it's a thing, they talk about them, they defend them, they create theories and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think that in itself is something remarkable, and is something that potentially could set us apart from other types of beings. That's just my personal opinion. Because who are we to say that animals don't have points of view, you know? I mean, if we go back to the visualization of the introduction, I think one of the claims that he made is that when sensory data, you know, is being processed by your nervous system, what happens is that there's always there's two things that are sort of being created in your mind or in your brain at the same time, and that is a representation of what you take in of the world, but also a point of view. So in a way, if you put animals and human beings on the same plane, as he seems to be doing, and saying that we're both capable of naive realism, then that in turn would mean that we each have a point of view. The only difference being that human beings can actually verbalize their point of view, and animals cannot, in terms of creating words, you know, like we do. Which doesn't mean that they can communicate, by the way, but we will get to that. I mean, communication doesn't necessarily have to be verbal. That's my opinion. This property, as noted, probably distinguishes us from most other animals on this planet. The ability to turn the first-person perspective inward to explore our emotional states and attend to our cognitive processes. And that goes back to what I just said, is that, you know, I personally think there's a difference between being aware of having a point of view and being aware of that point of view being just a construct. So in between those two states, there is this transparency, sort of Chinese wall, you know. And I don't think that having a point of view distinguishes us. I mean, I don't think that having a point of view per se distinguishes us enough from other biological entities with similar setups. Just to show you how grave of a consequence this line of thinking can have, is that if you think about it, you know, if what he says is unless, or what I feel he says is that unless what you metacognize is verbally communicated to another, you know, we can at best guess that, you know, that you are self-conscious. So unless you are able to verbalize your internal state to another, the other can only guess that you are self-conscious, which he claims to be one of the, or the distinguishing factor of being human, you know. So if you take this further, there technically wouldn't be a difference between a non-verbal autistic human being and an animal. Because a non-verbal autistic human being is unable to verbalize their internal states in words, you know, which doesn't mean that they don't have them. So we could, if we held on to Metzinger's line of thinking, we would down the road technically be able to deny a non-verbal autistic human being their humanity, which of course is a scary thought. But just to show you, you know, whatever philosophical stance you hold, that does have moral and ethical consequences down the road. So. The next topic is a very interesting one, and also a hugely important one in my opinion. We have 4 statements here. Theories change social practice, And practice eventually changes brains, the way we perceive the world. Meaning does change structure, though slowly, and structure in turn determines our inner lives, the flow of conscious experience. What Metzinger says here really is that there's a causal circularity between structure and content. So between, in our case, the structure of our brains, the very physical structure of our brains, and the content of our brains, or content in our consciousness, one should say. So the way, and causal circularity means that mutual dependence, so that the way something is structured or organized can influence the content that it produces and vice versa. In other words, the arrangement of a framework or a system or entity can shape the information or meaning that the entity generates, while the information or content itself can also impact how the structure evolves, or functions. So this creates a sort of feedback loop, and that's a continuous cycle, and that's, in my opinion, one reason why philosophy is hugely important. If by your thinking about, and science of consciousness also is hugely important, because by your thinking about your thinking and your processes and all that kind of stuff, you tend to change not only the content of your thinking, but the very conditions for you to do so. I'm highlighting the following 3 statements simply because I find them informative, and I also think that they sort of reflect the current state of consciousness research, roughly. And those are: consciousness is a graded phenomenon and comes in many different shades. Consciousness is also not a unitary phenomenon, but has many discernible aspects: memory, attention, feelings, the perception of color, self-awareness, and higher order thought. We have learned about psychiatric disorders and brain lesions, about coma and minimally conscious states, about dreams, lucid dreams, and other altered states of consciousness. All this has led to a general picture of a complex phenomenon that comes in different flavors and strengths. There is no single on-off switch. Let's just accept these statements for what they are, because I think he's right here. The next 3 statements are concerned with a main topic that is being discussed main contention point, one should say, between materialists and idealists, and that is correlation versus causation. We have 3 statements here. Eventually, we should be able to discern the minimal set of properties our brains require to activate specific qualities of experience, such as the apricot pink color of the evening sky or the scent of amber and sandalwood. However, what we do not know is how far discovering such neural correlates will go toward explaining consciousness. Correlation is not causation, nor is it explanation. So basically, even if we were able to prove that for every specific experience there is an exact neural correlate. So if you had a brain in a jar and it's sort of hooked up to a sensory system, much like such as we have, and you were able to sort of monitor in real time what is happening when that particular brain's having the experience of redness or sweetness or whatever, and you could always pinpoint the exact neural correlates that light up when the brain has that experience. So even if you were to be able to create exact correlates, matches. That wouldn't necessitate that one is the cause of the other. So, because it could very well be that, and that's probably one of the main arguments of idealists, is that what happens in brains when you have experiences is just something that happens while consciousness is at work. So consciousness can still be technically independent of physicality, independent of a brain, and could technically still be the cause for you to have experiences in the first place. Just because your brain depicts what's going on and depicts exactly what's going on doesn't mean that the brain is the cause of conscious states. So hope that makes it clear. And in that context, I'm not sure why. I find it curious why he brings those statements here, why he points to them, because and statement 62 being one of the main arguments against materialism, I don't quite understand why he would sort of erode his own position like that, but we'll find out later, maybe in the book. Now, I would like to read you a short paragraph that should speak for itself, because I found this rather a good paragraph in the book. The conscious brain is a biological machine, a reality engine that purports to tell us what exists and what doesn't. It is unsettling to discover that there are no colors out there in front of your eyes. The apricot pink of the setting sun is not a property of the evening sky. It is a property of the internal model of the evening sky, a model created by your brain. The evening sky is colorless. The world is not inhabited by colored objects at all. It is just as your physics teacher in high school told you. Out there in front of your eyes, there is just an ocean of electromagnetic radiation, a wild and ranging mixture of different wavelengths. Most of them are invisible to you and can never become part of your conscious model of reality. What is really happening is that the visual system in your brain is drilling a tunnel through this inconceivably rich physical environment, and in the process is painting the tunnel walls in various shades of color. Phenomenal color, appearance, for your conscious eyes only. I think that's worth thinking about, I think, and I, as an idealist, I don't contend with most of what he's saying here. And I think that's where the value of this book lies, is, he really goes a great length to popularize findings that neuroscience was able to make and connect them with philosophical thought. And I think he does a very good job. So with all the minor criticisms or contentions that I might have, I still think it's a very valuable read. Lastly, I would like to point out the factor of temporality, because he does also. I think that's a very intriguing topic in itself. We have 4 statements. Conscious experiences are full-blown mental models in the representational space opened up by the gigantic neural network in our heads. And because this space is generated by a person processing a memory and moving forward in time, it is a tunnel. So in connection with statement 65 and 66, it is that I would, just for reference sake, like to offer you three different theoretical standpoints that actually contest the notion that humans are actually moving forward in time. And this is to point out to you that, the nature of time itself is greatly debated, sort of separately from consciousness. I mean, in connection with consciousness, of course, but also just by its own sake. And I find that really interesting. So I wanted to point that out to you. So some perspectives that challenge the idea of linear time progression are eternalism, the block universe theory, and presentism. And I'm just going to read you a short paragraph for each stance. So eternalism. This view suggests that past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, and time is more like a block universe where all events coexist. From this standpoint, the idea of moving forward in time becomes more complex, as all movements are equally real. Block universe theory. Similar to eternalism, the block universe theory posits that the past, present, and future all exist concurrently. This challenges the conventional notion of time as a linear progression and suggests that time is a dimension more akin to space. Presentism. Presentism argues that only the present moment is real or exists, with the past being fixed and the future being indeterminate. This view contests the idea of moving forward in time, since it implies that time is constantly updating with each passing moment. So naturally, I'm not going to be able to debate or discuss each of these in detail here, but I just wanted to point out to you that there are many ways, of looking at time, and that the idea or the claim that we are, as human beings, moving forward in time by virtue of our having, taking up some space with our physical bodies is pretty much just a hypothesis, at this point. And that's not to say that Metzinger's model of PSM isn't useful, not at all. I'm just pointing out that what we tend to take for granted when we read a text like this, we tend to read over a lot of basic assumptions that are just being made for us, and that really we could be questioning. So let's try to sum up what we can take away so far from the book. I mean, one tends to get lost in all kinds of details. I personally feel that when you read a book like that, what happens is, when you read it like we are reading it right now, there's a lot of insular themes that you can follow, and you sort of lay out all these themes, but in the end what tends to happen is that there is a mosaic sort of forming out of all these independent themes, and there's quite a lot of also repetitive moments in going through a text like that. But I think to me this is still a very fun thing to do. I just love doing that. So, but anyway, let's try to at least sort of point to the elephant in the room, so as not to get lost. So if we had to wrap up all this into one sentence, all that we learned so far, It could be something like the content of consciousness is the content of a simulated world in our brains. And by virtue of a point of view or sense of self being part of this content, our sense of being is itself a simulation. Technically, this statement could be made by both a materialist and an idealist. I just wanted to point that out to you. So there is a certain ambiguity in the text, to me personally, so far. The fundamental difference between materialism and idealism, of course, is the question: what is primary? What is underlying it all? What is first, so to speak? Even though you couldn't speak of first in terms of linear time, but anyway, what is primary? Is it consciousness or is it matter? That's kind of like the basic question. And what I'm trying to say here is that you could make this summary statement from both perspectives, which is quite interesting in itself. So, this video was a bit longer. I hope you can take something out of it, and we will see each other in the next video. Bye.